20 m wide. That is all that stands between the world's oil supply and complete collapse. Iran didn't need a navy, they used speedboats, and they nearly won until something old, something that was supposed to be retired, showed up in the dark over the water, armed and hunting. What happened next changed everything. Welcome to the War II signal, where the world's most critical conflicts are analyzed with clarity, precision, and zero noise. Now, before we go any further, if you've lived long enough to remember the Cold War, the Gulf War, September 11th, then you already know the world doesn't warn you before it changes. Hit that subscribe button right now. Think of it as the newspaper you never cancel, except this one actually tells you what's really happening. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from today? Let's begin. There's a strip of ocean in the Middle East that is barely 20 m wide at its narrowest point. 20 m. That is roughly the distance a person can drive in 20 minutes on an open highway. But this is no ordinary stretch of water. This is the Strait of Hormuz, and whoever controls it controls the energy that keeps the modern world alive. Every single day, ships carrying roughly 20% of the entire planet's oil supply pass through that narrow corridor. Saudi Arabia's oil moves through it. Iraq's oil moves through it. Kuwait's oil, the UAE's oil, billions of dollars worth of energy every single day, squeezing through that 120 mil gap between the Persian Gulf and the open sea. For decades, the world simply assumed it would always remain open. In 2026, that assumption was shattered. It did not begin with warships firing at each other across open water. It did not begin with missiles lighting up the horizon in some dramatic opening battle. It began with speedboats, small, fast, and packed with explosives, launched quietly in the dead of night from hidden ports scattered along a hostile coastline. By the time anyone on a merchant vessel could react, it was already too late. Within weeks of the conflict beginning, at least 20 merchant ships had been struck. Tankers that normally moved without hesitation through the strait had stopped moving entirely. The world's most important waterway had been turned into something that looked less like a trade route and more like a kill zone. And the weapon doing all of this damage was not a fleet. It was not an air force. It was speedboats, underwater mines, and cheap attack drones. Three tools that together achieved what Iran's conventional military never could. To understand how the world arrived at this moment, one must go back to February 28, 2026. That was the night the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, described by analysts as the most significant American military operation in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Simultaneously, Israeli forces launched their own parallel campaign referred to as Operation Roaring Lion. The operation had a clear strategic logic behind it. Iran's power in the region rested on four main pillars: its ballistic missile arsenal, its nuclear program, its network of armed proxy groups spread across the Middle East, and finally, its ability to close the Strait of Hormuz. American and Israeli forces moved against the first three pillars immediately and with overwhelming force. Cruise missiles launched from submarines, precision bombs dropped by B-2 stealth bombers, coordinated strikes across dozens of target locations in a single night. The results were significant. According to the U.S. Secretary of Defense, more than 10,000 enemy targets were destroyed in under 1 month. Iran's ballistic missile production facilities were functionally destroyed, underground bunkers were penetrated, radar networks went dark. Within the first 3 weeks, approximately 85% of Iran's air defense network had been taken offline. By March 4th, just 4 days into the operation, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs declared that the United States had achieved air superiority across the southern flank of the Iranian coast. 3 pillars had been struck hard, but the fourth pillar, the Strait of Hormuz, was a completely different kind of problem. Iran had always known it could not match the United States in a conventional naval battle. That was never the plan. Instead, Iran had spent years preparing for exactly this scenario, building an asymmetric capability designed specifically to threaten a superior naval power without ever engaging it directly. Speedboats, mines, drones, simple, cheap, devastating. By mid-sea campaign, U.S. forces had engaged and destroyed more than 120 enemy vessels and 44 mine-laying ships, yet the strait remained effectively closed to Western commercial shipping. Oil prices had surged more than 40%. The global economy was beginning to feel the pressure. The Pentagon had dismantled Iran's conventional military capacity with remarkable speed, but Iran's asymmetric grip on the strait remained unbroken, and that is when the decision was made to send in something different, something old, something that no one expected to see flying over a contested waterway in 2026. There's an old saying among military planners: the right weapon is not always the newest one. Sometimes the right weapon is the one that was already built for exactly this kind of chaos. Designed decades ago by engineers who somehow understood that future wars would not always look like the wars they were preparing for. In the spring of 2026, over the dark waters of the Strait of Hormuz, that saying proved itself true, and it proved itself in the shape of a helicopter. The AH-64 Apache has been in service since the 1980s. It was built during the Cold War, designed to hunt Soviet tanks on the flat open plains of Europe. Its engineers imagined it flying low over fields and tree lines, not over contested ocean waterways in the middle of a 21st century energy crisis. But war rarely asks permission before it changes its shape. When the Pentagon began searching for an answer to Iran's swarm of explosive-laden speedboats and low-flying attack drones, the Apache emerged not as a compromise, but as precisely the right tool for a very specific and very dangerous job. General Dan Caney confirmed it publicly at a Pentagon press briefing on March 19th. AH-64 Apache attack helicopters, operated by both U.S. forces and regional allies, were actively patrolling the southern flank of Iran's coastline, hunting maritime vessels and intercepting one-way attack drones simultaneously. The announcement was deliberate. The choice of platform was not accidental. To understand why the Apache works so effectively in this environment, one must look at what it actually carries into battle. Its primary anti-surface weapon is the AGM-114 Hellfire missile, fast, precise, and powerful. The Hellfire was designed to destroy armored vehicles against a speedboat packed with explosives. It is devastating. There is simply no comparison between the armor of a tank and the hull of a fast attack craft. What the Hellfire does to steel and composite armor, it does even more completely to a vessel built for speed rather than survival. But the Hellfire is only the beginning. Beneath the Apache's fuselage sits the M230 chain gun, a 30 mm automatic cannon that fires at approximately 625 rounds per minute. In a single second of sustained fire, it delivers around 10 rounds. Against a Shahed drone, a relatively fragile, unmanned flying machine that costs around tens of thousands of dollars. One short burst from that chain gun is enough. The drone simply ceases to exist. Combat footage released by the United Arab Emirates, which also operates Apache helicopters, showed exactly this in action. An AH-64 locks onto multiple incoming Iranian Shahed drones and engages them in quick succession. The results are immediate and conclusive. The tactic works, it works efficiently, and it works repeatedly. Beyond these core weapons, the Apache can carry Stinger missiles, AIM-9 Sidewinders, and other air-to-air munitions, giving it genuine capability against airborne threats if the situation demands it. But raw firepower alone does not explain why the Apache is so effective over the Strait of Hormuz. The deeper answer lies in how it moves and what it sees. The Apache is built to fly low, extremely low, right down at near sea level into the same environment where Iran's speedboats operate, where drones skim the surface, where the threat is always close and always fast. There is no hiding from an Apache operating at that altitude when the target is also operating at that altitude. The Apache does not look down at the problem from a safe distance. It enters the problem directly. Its sensor package includes radar, thermal imaging, and precision target designation systems, allowing crews to detect incoming drones and fast boats at distance, even in darkness, even in poor conditions. This makes the Apache not just a weapon platform, but an early warning node, feeding information into the broader US air operation over the strait before a single missile is fired. Then there's the electronic warfare suite, radio jammers, infrared countermeasures, interference systems. The Apache arrives in a contested environment, already working to degrade the enemy's ability to respond effectively. There is one additional capability worth examining carefully. The Apache can carry non-explosive kinetic projectiles, rounds that destroy targets through impact force alone without detonating a warhead. Against a fragile drone, a direct hit is sufficient. The drone does not need to be blown apart, it simply needs to be struck. In a high-tempo campaign where every sortie pushes aircraft and crews to their operational limits, this matters enormously. Expensive explosive munitions are conserved. The Apache keeps flying. The mission continues. This is not a minor detail. In a conflict where the rate of Iranian drone launches has been relentless, logistics and munition conservation are as strategically important as any individual engagement. What the Apache represents in the Strait of Hormuz in 2026 is something that military analysts will study for years. It is proof that a platform designed for one kind of war can be adapted deliberately, intelligently, and effectively for a war that looks nothing like the one it was built for. Iran built its asymmetric strategy around the assumption that small, cheap, fast threats would be difficult and costly to counter. The Apache arrived and changed that calculation entirely. Imagine a weapon so large, so loud, so brutally powerful that engineers did not build an aircraft around a mission, they built an aircraft around the gun. That is not a metaphor. That is not dramatic language designed to impress an audience. That is the literal engineering philosophy behind one of the most unusual combat aircraft ever to enter military service. The A-10 Thunderbolt Setunu, known universally by its nickname the Warthog, was not designed to be elegant. It was not designed to be fast. It was not designed to slip invisibly through radar networks or engage targets from 50,000 feet in complete safety. It was designed to fly low, fly slow, absorb punishment, and destroy everything in front of it. In 2026, over the Strait of Hormuz, that is exactly what it is doing. The Warthog was born during the Cold War, built around a single terrifying weapon, the GRU-8 Avenger, a 30mm rotary cannon, so large and so heavy that it occupies most of the aircraft's forward fuselage. Pilots and analysts have long joked that the A-10 is not an aircraft with a gun attached, it is a gun with an aircraft attached. That joke contains a serious truth. The GRU-8 fires depleted uranium rounds at approximately 3,900 rounds per minute. At its operational firing rate, it delivers around 65 rounds every single second. The sound it produces, a low grinding mechanical burst lasting less than 2 seconds, is immediately recognizable to anyone who has heard it in combat footage. Soldiers on the ground who have heard that sound in real combat situations describe a very specific feeling, relief, because that sound means the Warthog is on their side. But the GRU-8 cannon is only one piece of what the A-10 brings to the strait. CENTCOM imagery confirmed A-10s operating over the Strait of Hormuz, carrying mixed combat loadouts, APKWS-2 laser-guided rockets and AGM-65 Maverick air-to-surface missiles among them. These are weapons optimized precisely for the kind of surface targets they are being asked to engage: fast attack boats, coastal launch sites, mine-laying vessels, supply depots along Iran's southern coastline. Each weapon serves a specific purpose. The laser-guided rockets offer precision against smaller, faster-moving surface targets. The Maverick missiles extend that destructive capability to hardened ground installations, missile launch sites, port facilities, radar installations. The infrastructure from which Iran's asymmetric threat originates before it ever reaches the water. This distinction matters enormously. The Apache hunts threats that are already in the water. The Warthog reaches back to the coastline and destroys the sources of those threats before they can be deployed. Together, they do not simply react to Iran's strategy. They systematically dismantle it layer by layer from the water surface all the way back to the shore. What makes the A-10 genuinely irreplaceable in this environment, however, is something that no weapons list fully captures. It is the ability to think before it fires. High-speed strike aircraft move too fast. At the speeds modern jets operate, a pilot has seconds, sometimes less, to identify a contact, confirm it is hostile, and make a weapons decision. In the Strait of Hormuz, where civilian merchant vessels and Iranian fast attack boats can occupy the same stretch of water simultaneously, that margin for error is dangerously narrow. The Warthog solves this problem simply by being slow. It can orbit at low altitude over a contested area for extended periods, watching, analyzing, confirming. Its pilot has time to visually identify a target, time to verify it is hostile, time to select the appropriate weapon and engage with precision. Analysts have described this capability as the A-10 functioning as a tactical kill chain stabilizer, a calm, persistent presence in a fragmented battle space where everything else is moving fast and the consequences of mistakes are severe. Then there is the matter of survivability. Iran's integrated air defense network has been largely destroyed by this point in the campaign, but destruction is never total. Isolated fragments remained, mobile surface-to-air missile systems, shoulder-fired man-pad weapons carried by individual fighters along the coastline. These are the threats that remain, and they are precisely the threats the A-10 was engineered to survive. Its cockpit is surrounded by a titanium armor shell on the famous bathtub, capable of withstanding direct hits from heavy-caliber rounds. Its flight systems are fully redundant, meaning the aircraft can continue flying even after sustaining damage that would bring down most other platforms. Retired Air Force Colonel Kim Campbell demonstrated this in the most direct way possible during the 2003 Iraq invasion, landing a severely damaged A-10 with zero hydraulic power, controlling the aircraft manually all the way to the runway. She later argued publicly that the A-10's breed of close, persistent stand-in firepower would always find its moment. Operation Epic Fury became that moment, but that validation came with a cost that cannot be ignored. On April 3, 2026, 6 weeks into the campaign, an A-10 Warthog operating near the Strait of Hormuz was struck by hostile fire during a combat search and rescue mission. The pilot managed to maneuver the damaged aircraft into Kuwaiti airspace before ejecting safely and was successfully recovered. On the same day, an F-15E Strike Eagle was downed over Iran. Its pilot was recovered. Its weapons systems officer remained listed as missing. These losses did not signal a collapse of American air superiority. They did not mean the Warthog was being driven from the fight. What they confirmed with absolute clarity is that this is a real war being fought at real risk by real crews operating in a genuinely dangerous environment. War does not offer guarantees, not even to the side with the better aircraft. What the A-10 has demonstrated over the Strait of Hormuz in 2026 is something the retirement debates in Washington never fully accounted for. Some problems cannot be solved from altitude. Some problems require a platform willing to come down low, get close, stay patient, and finish the job. Every war has a moment where the picture becomes clear. Not clear in the sense that the fighting is over, clear in the sense that anyone paying careful attention can finally see where it is all heading. In Operation Epic Fury, that moment arrived, not with a single dramatic battle, but with a series of movements, deployments, and statements that, taken together, pointed towards something far larger than an air campaign over a contested waterway. The Apaches and the Warthogs were never the endgame, they were the preparation for it. On March 13, 2026, U.S. forces conducted what President Trump described as one of the most powerful bombing raids in the history of the Middle East. The target was Kharg Island, a 5 m wide coral outcrop sitting approximately 15 to 20 m off Iran's southwestern coast. Kharg Island is not simply a piece of geography, it is the financial heartbeat of the Iranian regime. Between 90 and 95% of all Iranian crude oil exports move through that single island. Its pipelines connect directly to Iran's largest oil and gas fields on the mainland. The Flet Iran Oil Company alone, operating from Kharg Island, produces 500,000 barrels of crude oil every single day. More than 90 Iranian military sites on the island were struck. Naval mine storage facilities, missile storage bunkers, the island's airfield, radar installations, military infrastructure across the entire surface of that small piece of land was systematically destroyed. But the oil terminals were left completely untouched. That decision was not an oversight. It was a message. President Trump delivered that message directly, stating publicly that if Iran did not reopen the Strait of Hormuz and cease attacking shipping, he would immediately reconsider and strike the oil infrastructure as well. By March 30th, that warning escalated further. Trump stated that if a deal was not reached, the United States would destroy Iran's power plants, oil wells, Kharg Island's infrastructure, and possibly its desalination plants entirely. The oil terminal was being held in reserve, not as a target, as a lever, the most powerful economic weapon the United States had not yet chosen to use. But coercive pressure from the air has its limits, and Washington appeared to understand this clearly, because while the strikes on Kharg Island were still being analyzed, something else was already quietly happening, something that told a far more complete story about where Operation Epic Fury was truly heading. Troops were moving. The 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, approximately 2,500 Marines, was ordered to the Middle East from its base in Okinawa, Japan, arriving roughly 2 weeks into the conflict aboard the USS Tripoli. The 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit departed San Diego on March 18th aboard the USS Boxer, carrying an additional 2,200 Marines. Simultaneously, approximately 2,000 soldiers from the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne Division were ordered to begin moving toward the region, more than 6,000 highly trained ground troops converging on a single theater of operations. These are not garrison forces, these are not troops sent to guard embassies or secure perimeters. Marine Expeditionary Units and Airborne Infantry Divisions are built for one specific purpose: rapid forcible entry into contested territory, amphibious landings, helicopter-borne raids, island seizures, the kind of operations that do not happen unless someone somewhere has already decided they may be necessary. Secretary of State Marco Rubio added another dimension that stopped analysts mid-sentence. At a congressional briefing, Rubio stated that the United States may need to physically secure nuclear material inside Iran. His exact words carried unmistakable weight. "People are going to have to go and get it," he said, without specifying who those people would be or exactly where they would be going. That statement, combined with the force movements already underway, shifted the nature of the conversation among serious analysts from whether ground action was possible to whether it had already been decided. For students of American military history, the pattern unfolding in 2026 carries a familiar shape. In Iraq in 2003, in Afghanistan before that, Apache helicopters and A-10 Warthogs were among the first platforms deployed ahead of major ground advances. Military planners call it battlefield shaping, suppressing enemy positions, destroying mobile threats, eliminating the defenses that would otherwise resist a ground force moving in behind them. Kharg Island's military infrastructure has already been largely destroyed by U.S. air power. Its airfield has been struck, its missile bunkers have been hit, its radar sites are gone. What remains is an island whose oil terminals continue to operate, deliberately preserved, sitting 15 miles off the Iranian coast, surrounded by water, with its military defenses functionally eliminated. If US ground forces were to seize Kharg Island, they would not need to destroy the oil infrastructure to deny it to Iran. Simply controlling the terminal would achieve that, and denying Iran 90% of its crude export revenue in the context of a regime already under catastrophic military pressure would represent a strategic blow of an entirely different magnitude than anything an air campaign alone could deliver. There's one final factor that makes this endgame more complicated than any military map can show. Iran has no clear voice left to negotiate with. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed in the opening hours of Operation Epic Fury. The political structure that would normally produce a decision-maker capable of authorizing a ceasefire or a negotiated settlement has been severely disrupted. In 1988, Operation Praying Mantis, in which the United States destroyed a significant portion of Iran's naval capacity in a single day, ultimately contributed to Iranian acceptance of a ceasefire in the Iran-Iraq War. The difference in 2026 is the absence of a coherent leadership structure with the authority to say yes to an agreement. That absence does not reduce the military pressure being applied, but it does complicate the path from that pressure to a resolution. The Apaches are still flying over the strait, the Warthogs are still hunting along the coastline, the Marines are still moving, and the oil terminals on Kharg Island are still standing, waiting to become either the final bargaining chip in a negotiated settlement or the objective of an operation that has not yet been announced. The strait is not yet open, the war is not yet over, and the decisions being made right now in command centers, in congressional briefing rooms, and aboard amphibious assault ships moving quietly through the Arabian Sea will determine what the Middle East looks like for decades to nose.